This is the MeatEater podcast coming at you shirtless, severely bug-bitten, and in my case, underwearless.
We hunt the MeatEater podcast.
You can't predict anything.
The MeatEater podcast is brought to you by First Light. Whether you're checking trail cams, hanging deer stands, or scouting for elk, First Light has performance apparel to support every hunter in every environment. Check it out at firstlight.com. FIRSTLITE.com. Hey, Steve calling in from Alaska. I'm here to announce that the latest volume of MeatEater's Campfire Stories is available now. This volume is called Discoveries, Revelations, and Near Misses. So the volume is a little twist on our normal format. Like, it includes all of those near-death escapes in the wild that really define our other two volumes of MeatEater's Campfire Stories. But this includes something added and special, which is a few stories about life-changing discoveries and revelations in the wild. The one you're going to hear at the end of this podcast involves a guy whose friends refer to him as Black Cloud Bob, because this guy has a cloud of bad luck that follows him. And this story you're going to hear is like a terrible near-death experience that kind of bleeds into another terrible near-death experience to make sort of like a duplex of near-death experiences. It's a horrendous story, and it's at the end of the podcast. You'll listen to that. If you enjoy, you can go anywhere audiobooks are sold and get your latest volume of MeatEater's Campfire Stories. I hope you enjoy.
Dad, I got one!
All right, we're recording from the MeatEater flagship store in downtown Bozeman, Montana, and I am right below the buffalo skull that now has its sign, "Stick Finger Here." People have been sticking their finger in that hole, Mark. Have you?
I have not yet.
Apparently I should.
You worried it's going to get all greasy and dirty there?
No, what I would like to do is make like a, I'd like to, well, I don't even want to tell you what I'd like to do. Although I'd like to build in a little surprise. But stick your finger in that hole. People come by, they send pictures of themselves with their finger in that hole. That and all kinds of other oddities and great products down here at the MeatEater flagship store, downtown Bozeman, Montana, where we are recording right now. Come on down and say hi. Also, major importance, if you like to watch podcasts from our podcast network on YouTube, you have to do something. We're moving all of our podcast videos are moving to a new YouTube channel, which is called, very simple, MeatEater Podcast Network. So if you subscribe to the MeatEater YouTube channel, you will no longer be seeing our podcast videos popping up. You got to go to this new channel, which is all podcast video going forward on the new channel. So just take a second right now, go to YouTube, search MeatEater Podcast Network, click subscribe, and you will then be served all of our podcast videos there, and you won't miss anything. You know what we're so late on discussing? Well, first off, I'm joined by Brody, Cal, Mark, Kenyon, and Dr. Randall. Corinne's here, but she doesn't say much. We're so late on talking about it, because I meant to talk about it, that we got to talk about it now for a minute, though we're so late on talking about it. All the flurry of news about the Colorado deer hunters, two old-timers, that died of
Crutchfield Jacobs?
Yes. And some researcher, who it turns out it was not really, pointed out that these two guys hunted deer together, were consumers of deer in Colorado, and then happened to develop Jakob Creutzfeldt. And he was saying, hey, heads up. They deer hunted, there's a possibility that they got this disease from eating deer. Want to be, and that was quite irresponsible thing to pump out there. Are you guys? How much do you guys know about this? I'm the only one that knows about this.
I know about it.
No. Yeah, I
I know a
did.
decent bit.
Totally tracking. You're just on a roll. You haven't messed anything up too bad.
Well, I know.
So.
Now I got to jump in and find some stuff.
Oh,
So talk.
I'll
Please
say
do.
that the one
Spill the
thing
dead air.
the thing that happened here was that he made this little bit of conjecture, which then got picked up as a soundbite across some media outlets,
which turned
then
into a headline.
Yes.
became a headline and blew up into hysteria. And they looked past the point that this was not stemming from some peer-reviewed study, but this was just a piece of, again, conjecture.
It was a question.
Yeah.
Yeah, it wasn't a study.
And
Right.
the implication is that they got Jacob from
Eating deer.
Deer.
yeah
Essentially,
from
was reported all-
CWD.
crossing the species
Yeah,
barrier.
the implication is that CWD is crossing the species barrier.
Yeah. Now, there was a version of this years ago, equally irresponsible, where they had a guy that had Jakob Creutzfeldt, and in his personal history had eaten a squirrel brain. What was the headline everywhere? Man got it from eating a squirrel brain. When in fact it was simply that in his personal history, he'd eaten a squirrel brain. Jim Heffelfinger, when this came out, this is a long time ago now, when this came out from Jim Heffelfinger, he said, in talking about this little flurry of news activity, he pointed out that he doesn't even want to post a link because he doesn't want to perpetuate the spread of this misinformation or information. He said, this is not a study, and this is not a scientific paper. The whole thing is 344 words and is simply a mention about two hunters that died of CJD, and both of them ate deer from the same deer population. There is no evidence of CWD infecting hunters. There are clusters of CJD throughout the country, some in CWD areas and some outside CWD areas. With the spread of CWD nationwide, it is not very noteworthy, meaning that now, 30 some states have CWD. With the spread of CWD nationwide, it is not very noteworthy that two CJD victims in the same rural area may have both eaten venison. He points out, we have to be vigilant about the possible jump of a prion disease from deer to hunter. I couldn't agree more. This is the thing, much to Doug Dern's annoyance, this is, I don't want to say the only thing, it's the primary thing that worries me about CWD. Is the possibility that it would jump the species barrier and go to humans. If God came down and said, Steve, there is no chance CWD can jump to humans, I would care, this is going to really piss off Doug, 85% less about CWD.
I think that like the human jump is like a step too far, really. I think people should be way more concerned. Deer hunters should be way more concerned with CWD jumping to any sort of domestic livestock.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That's what blows my mind is why the USDA isn't more worried.
Yeah.
I don't know if you guys know, I'm no infectious disease specialist, but I'm worried as a person. How are they not worried about cattle?
Oh, yeah. I
They
mean,
look a hell of a lot more like a deer than I do.
the USDA response to domestic livestock with these types of diseases is severe and final. It's full eradication. So, yeah.
Which is what makes it so scary. If ever
Yes.
it does jump to humans, it's going to be the end of our lifestyle, or that beginning of that end.
Yeah.
That's right.
Now, but
It's not going to be as simple as turning a fan off in a chicken house.
You guys are just fueling the fire now.
drunker to boil out. Now, here is from a peer-reviewed paper. This is from a peer-reviewed paper, okay? In Colorado, I want to point out to people, Colorado, I'm very reluctant to get into this right now because I don't want this to be taken wrong. I am an individual who is concerned about CWD. I think that we should be testing robustly. I think we should be investing a lot of money into researching CWD. I think we should find out everything we can find out about CWD. And I think we should be taking reasonable steps to slow the spread of CWD. Me jumping on someone for claiming that CWD has jumped into the human population is not because I'm trying to think that CWD is going to go away or I'm trying to whitewash the risk of CWD. It's because I don't think that you should go around saying crazy shit to really upset people based off no evidence. Like, let's have good, clean material, good, clean science around CWD and not hysterical hogwash around CWD. A problem, I'm still ahead of what I'm going to read you next. A problem I have found, even within the CWD spectrum being CWD deniers who once upon a time, a CWD denier was someone who said, there's no such thing as CWD. The same way early on, a COVID denier was someone who said, there's no such thing as COVID. Eventually, a COVID denier became someone who said, sure, there's COVID. I just don't think it's that alarming, which puts me in COVID denier, which COVID deniers have caught up to where I'm at, where it's like, sure, it's there. I just don't think it's enough. I don't think it warrants shutting people's businesses down. A CWD denier at a time said there's no such thing. It's all a lie. Now they say, oh yeah, it's real. I'm just not alarmed. Well, it's real. I'm alarmed. But don't go running around saying crazy shit that's not true.
Especially knowing what's going to happen in the media after you say it.
And they play into that. And there are people on the spectrum. I was trying to get into the spectrum. On the spectrum of CWD believers, whatever, you have deniers who at this current stage are like, yes, it's real, but it doesn't matter. Two people saying, if you so much as put a piece of deer meat on a stainless steel table, you could then drop a nuclear bomb on that steel table, and that steel table is still going to give you Jakob Creutzfeldt disease. Like, there's this spectrum. The people on the far end, the super alarmists, also need to chill out. And I've told some of them face to face, please chill out with the zombie deer disease, the all that garbage. From a peer-reviewed paper, okay? Here's this passage from a peer-reviewed paper. I also got to back up. A lot of background here, people. I'm sorry. Colorado was where CWD was first identified. CWD was first identified in Colorado at a deer and elk breeding facility, a research facility. That's ground zero for CWD in terms of identification. That they identified it there does not mean that it emerged there. It was identified there. All right. The date they identified it in the 70s does not mean it was born that day. The more you look for it, the more you find it, as we're seeing. Meaning, as more and more states find CWD, it's often that more and more states are looking for CWD. We don't know where it came from. We don't know when it first emerged. It was first identified in Colorado. Back to this peer-reviewed paper. In 7 Colorado counties with high CWD prevalence, 75% of state hunting licenses are issued locally, which suggests that residents consume most regionally harvested game. So here, all they're trying to establish is that if you're looking at CWD prevalence and who's eating CWD-infected meat, let's look locally. Okay, we'll go to these counties in Colorado with a lot of CWD, and we're going to look at locals, making the assumption that locals are eating most of the local deer meat. Goes on to say, we used Colorado death certificate data from 1979 through 2001 to evaluate rates of death from the human prion disease, Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease. Am I saying that right? It's a bit
close
no
enough.
idea.
Yeah,
I'm going
right.
to say CJD so I don't have to feel like I'm messing it up every time.
There you go.
The relative risk of CJD for CWD endemic county residents was not significantly increased, and the rate of CJD did not increase over time. In Colorado, human prion disease resulting from CWD exposure is rare or non-existent. The reason they're saying is rare or non-existent is because they haven't found it. Then it goes on to say, however, there's a lot we don't know. The other piece of this is, even after this news came out implying a correlation between consumption in these two cases, after this news came out, statistically, those two cases happening to come from that area was not an outlier. You have about a dozen cases a year that we found. It was like a giant nothing. And like everything, like the guy that got it from eating squirrel brains, you wind up being that when a news story like that comes out, got so worked up, I got to take my glasses off. When a news story like that comes out, the retraction never gets the traction. You following this repeated use of the retraction never gets the traction. Wish I could keep it going.
That the initial action.
The retraction never gets the traction that the initial action
That got the reaction from the initial action.
It just doesn't.
It's pretty good.
CWD scares the shit out of me. So don't be doing stuff like that. Because I'm already scared.
Is it worth talking about the Oklahoma thing then?
Yes.
Yep.
Would you like to?
I could. I didn't know if Steve wanted to lead that off or not. But
Can we get into it in a minute?
Yeah.
I'm here to talk about that. That, I think, like, that, God bless them for trying to find a thing. You listeners have no idea what we're talking about. God bless them, but come on.
Yeah.
We've covered this heavily on the week in review.
Yeah.
Because, again, when I first saw it as a little blurb, I was kind of like, ha.
This can't be.
That ain't going to happen.
Little did you know.
Oh, my God.
Maybe we don't even get into Randall, well, damn it. I want to get into it. A couple things real quick. I put this in the notes and everybody got mad. I wrote in the notes, Trump is right about voter fraud. Hear me out. Hear me out.
I didn't hear a single person in this room get mad.
Not mad.
We mostly...
No, not mad.
They were like,
eyebrows
raised.
What? They were
I
eyebrows.
just wanted
Tell
to
us
be
more.
briefed in general
The other night
about
I'm
your
gonna
approach.
I thought
I'm on
the
the other night
whole-
I'm on date night. I'm on date night. Not on Dateline. I'm on date night with my wife. And I'm trying to listen to what she's telling me. But I
But you're
can't.
not.
'cause
But
I'm
there's
over-
something way more interesting going on.
something way more interesting going on. I come into a restaurant and there's a big group of people. It looked like a
Bunch
corporate
of funny-looking people.
looked like a corporate function. And I said, that's weird. What are these guys doing in town? Something didn't fit. Turns out, I don't want to trivialize. They're from World Wildlife Fund. I don't want to trivialize World Wildlife Fund, but of the many things they do, one of the things they do is they are a thorn in the side of hunters. So they do a lot of things for wildlife, positive things for wildlife, but anytime, they're always litigating against hunters in cases where I don't think it has anything to do with preserving biodiversity. It's just am I fair?
I think that's totally fine.
I think
Yes.
you're being overly fair.
Center for Biological Diversity, World Wildlife Fund are always going to litigate against hunters, and they're always going to sort of, even with stable wildlife populations, they're going to kind of come and act like hunting is somehow imperiling stable wildlife populations, and they're going to come out. I picked this up. I hear a story about Cory Booker.
He was a senator.
Yeah, and someone's
Jersey.
telling the story as a way to demonstrate how nice Cory Booker is. And I'll point out, Cory Booker's a vegan. Telling how nice Cory Booker is.
Is that relevant to the story?
Yeah, by recounting an interaction that Cory Booker is having with a flight attendant. I'm hearing it, and I'm like, that's him scamming on a flight attendant. This is just the story I hear. I'm like, that's not nice. That's scamming. Not to say he scammed on a flight attendant, but just that's what caught my attention. Okay? I'm not coming here and saying he did. I'm saying individuals telling a story. And then the individual tells a story about fixing to commit voter fraud.
And the whole time, your dear, beautiful,
Is telling me
sweet
stuff.
wife is talking, and you're going,
Well, I'm with my left ear, I'm listening to her. With my right ear, I'm listening to this voter fraud plan. There's an individual in Chicago.
And you're pretty deaf in that left ear.
I'd love to hear Katie's perspective on this.
Should I cut all this off for legal reasons? How bad is it that I overheard something in a restaurant? Are you allowed to do this?
Yeah, you're totally allowed to do this.
You got me in the right?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, the right would be
The individual's talking lives in Chicago. He lives in Chicago. Now, he did not say who he's planning on voting for this fall, but he's explaining to everyone that he knows how Illinois is going to go on this fall's presidential election. Okay? He owns a cabin in Michigan. He wants to be able to vote in a battleground state this November. So he went and got a Michigan driver's license. When he asked about the legality of what he's doing, he was told you're supposed to spend a majority of your time in the state where you're registered to vote. But they said they only really care about that with rich people. And since he works for an NGO, he felt that this did not apply to him.
Wow.
Just overheard. How do you do the right caveat? Overheard in a restaurant.
Yeah. I thought the
Overheard in a restaurant.
I thought the whole
Crazy.
disquisition about the CWD Colorado hunter scare, but you need evidence. I thought that was all a setup for this anecdote.
No. It's just something I overheard.
Now I think if you were to
Should
say
Phil
that
bleep that whole thing out?
No, because overheard at a restaurant, right? Like,
Yeah.
we have been
Talk of the town.
approached by a police officer in my younger years because during our late night dinner, we thoroughly ran through all the ways we could have dined and dashed, right? eaten and left without paying, right? As just a fun way to pass
have
the
dinner.
time where you're having dinner, right?
Yeah, so you're at dinner, you're discussing ways in which you could get out of paying for said dinner.
Right.
Yeah.
Which at that point in our lives was the perfect crime, right?
That's how you would really stick it to the man.
Probably the first people to ever pull that off at a
Oh,
Denny's.
I know why I brought this up.
What?
Because Cal was laying out for me, someone laying out for him a way in which you could get a way in which you could get a resident hunting license that you weren't allowed to get.
Yes.
They were sort of saying a fella could.
Yeah.
And Cal was saying, or a fella could just buy the non-resident hunting license.
Yes. Instead of purchasing a piece of land, getting a P.O. box, setting up an LLC, I'm like, boy, that sounds like...
Dude, we used to see like very well-off second homeowners in Colorado try to bend over backwards to get a resident fishing license instead of a non-resident, which is like a $50 difference.
Yeah, but you know what they're doing, though? They're chasing the high,
Yep,
right?
Of sticking it to the man.
Well,
Yeah.
it's not necessarily sticking it to the man.
The
It's like the
man
same
being
people who have coupons,
your fishing game
right?
agency.
It's like, oh, I'm saving money, and
Yep.
that's what really
Yeah.
gets them going.
Love coupons.
Well, that's your heritage.
Here's an interesting. I like this because we should start. You know, Corinne's not gonna like this because Corinne doesn't like when we think of ways in which Corinne could get more email. But if you want to send in an email saying, "Here's a wild ass idea," in the subject line, and you got a wild ass idea, go ahead and throw it in. Send it to Corinne. Here's a guy wrote in a wild ass idea in talking about live sonar and the controversies surrounding live sonar. He's saying, well, think about Dingle Johnson. Some old timer who's digging worms out of his garden and using the same bag of eagle claw hooks he bought 20 years ago, fishing on a resident license. How much
senior
is he
license.
fishing on a resident lifetime license that he bought 60 years ago, digging worms out of his garden, bought a bag of 300 eagle claw hooks at a sportsman show 2 decades ago, out of some old ass rowboat that he bought at a yard sale, right? What is he doing for Dingle Johnson?
He's taken, not given.
There's your enemy. That guy. He's saying a live sonar guy is not the enemy. Because this guy, think about the amount of money this guy's pumping into conservation through excise taxes on fishing equipment.
Yeah. Yeah.
Interesting angle.
I added all the stuff about the old
To
guy.
this guy's credit, he didn't call anyone the enemy. He just said it was sort of a thoughtful.
That's why I didn't use his name.
Yeah.
I was kind of filling out his argument.
I growing up, like how long you would have a box of large caliber ammunition, right?
Mhm.
I mean,
Like the box would corrode.
yes, exactly.
The green and yellow.
The
box.
folds,
Yeah,
the
exactly,
folds
yes.
on the box would give out, and you'd have to tape them back together before it was gone.
Right.
And there's all kinds of corrosion on the cartridges themselves.
Exactly.
When my dad died, and I was able to raid his ammo bin, I thought at that time that I would never buy ammo again. I was like, well, shit, here's 40 Remington core locks. That's like, 20 deer and then 20 shots to make sure I'm still on.
Yeah. Nope, still on. Still good. Yeah.
It would be really interesting, though, to try to run the numbers on the increased funds that we're getting in from, increased purchase and folks becoming more and more fervent about this pursuit, right? If you were to compare that to the negative pressure outcomes of it and try to see, like, how does that,
Yeah, is there a balance
Yeah,
there?
what's that look like?
Here's a $4,000 purchase with excise taxes at
11%.
11%. That makes me feel bad for yelling at my kid about buying worms.
Got a whole garden out there you could have dug up.
Oh, I'm not going to do one because we haven't found out if people like them or not. Play the drop, Phil.
I liked the previous one. It just went on
Too long.
a little too long.
Well, I didn't get to half
But
of
I-
the things.
I bet.
I kind of liked that because it was awkwardly long. And so that was kind of what made it so great.
Play the drop, Phil.
Ready for this one?
Well,
But I think this should be an alternating host deal too,
It's
because
time
I got
for
a bunch.
Steve
Oh, do you?
Reads
Yeah.
books, so you ain't got to.
Okay, this is a teaser for a future installment. Alaska Tracks. Life stories from hunters, fishermen, and trappers of Alaska. There's a Randy Zarnk. He's the president of Alaska Trappers Association. and he's doing an oral history, talking to old timers. I'm just going to share two quick ones for you. I put my damn glasses back on. I'd have never started making a podcast if I knew I was going to lose my reading vision. Listen to this. Very quick. From the time I was about 10 years old, I had to make a living for the whole family. His dad, his dad got to where he couldn't work anymore during the Spanish flu pandemic of 1918, which hit Alaska hard. From the time I was about 10 years old, I had to make a living for the whole family. The Smithsonian had been paying my brother $45 a piece for black bear skulls and $75 for grizzlies. If I could get one bear a month, that was pretty good money. I'd sell the feet to the Chinese. You listening, Corinne?
Yep.
She perked right up.
I still have never eaten a barefoot, though. I'm looking forward to the time I can.
And I got $7 a piece for the galls. So if you add it all up, one bear would bring in quite a bit of money. Jumping ahead. This is from a different fella. Duke Short out of Cake, Alaska. I hunted eagles for bounty. If you tell people that now, they think you're a really bad person. We got $2 a piece for eagles. The biggest day I had was during a herring run. The eagles were eating the herring, and I killed 33.
Oh, my.
The only reason I didn't get more was I ran out of bullets. Ladies and gentlemen, that's today's installment of Steve Reads Books, so you ain't got to.
Now, something you didn't do in the first one, but I wanted to know was just, do you recommend the book? Like, is this something other folks should, even though they ain't got to read it, but they could?
Well, let me put it to you this way, Mark. Guess how far I had to read for those tidbits?
Not very far.
Page 14 is all farther. And I didn't even read all the good stuff.
Steve reads the first 15 pages of a book.
Well, no, I'm going to do a full report. And Cal just announced that he's going to do a full report.
I look forward to it
for sure.
Full of
so-
juicy tidbits.
Yeah. I think we should buy a timer maybe, Corinne,
Yeah,
and figure
you can
out
do
that the
that.
section, what's a reasonable length for, let's say
You-
Cal reads books that you ain't got to.
I mean, a couple minutes.
No, a couple minutes.
And I think it should.
Never mind.
I think it should end with
A couple minutes.
like buy it or don't.
Yeah, like there's
But-
got to be an assessment.
But we should work in bang for your buck so we can have a sound
I think
effect.
a solid 25 minutes.
Well, then we should just start a
that's-
new podcast.
I was thinking
in that
15.
case.
We get a timer, and when you present a great book, you got 15 minutes.
Mhm.
I like it.
Yeah.
New podcast.
We can have-
That's the
Oh,
better
can we get
idea.
that machine back out that you used to like
Oh, the stop
to
the
rate
stop
how
clock?
much you like something?
Oh yeah, that's yeah. We'll bring that back.
So I don't know. You tell me, Mark. 14 pages, and I found that.
No, that seems like a hell of an ROI.
Then I fell asleep last night.
Perfect.
And, I mean, not because the book was no good. You know, you get to a point where you're just going to go
Yeah.
to bed.
Yeah. I'm sold.
Shooting Eagles, $3 a piece. Randall, can you talk about the breed and mule deer in Mexico? We keep wanting to get into this. Did you get boned up or not boned up?
I mean, I familiarized myself with the case a little bit, but
But did
essentially,
you know about it prior to this?
No, I didn't.
Are those knockoff Nikes? Because the thing's backwards.
No, they're real Nikes. These are
Oh, there it's real.
Limited edition.
these are the Giannis Antetokounmpo Immortality 3s. Got them at Famous Footwear for $49.99 because I think they're a few generations old.
Love them.
But
Sorry, I just got distracted. It just seems so just unlike you.
I mean, you put a pair of shoes in front of me, a new pair of shoes for $49.99. I'm going to have a hard time walking away.
Okay, someone walk me through the breeding mule deer in Mexico, because I used to like to say, I think I mentioned this before, I used to like to say the thing I love about mule deer is you can't buy a big one, which is not true.
Yeah, and this, I mean, my understanding of the case was that it's an American citizen, and he's in business with two Mexican citizens who own a ranch in Mexico, and had been working with them to improve mule deer genetics. And he grew the business, and then got the first permit to bring those genetics across the border, and then
In the form of semen.
in the form of semen straws. There was a note in here about how many semen 1,460 semen straws.
And those are coming from
More than I've ever seen.
those are coming from like a captive breeding facility.
Yeah, and 269 embryos, mule deer embryos.
Wow.
And essentially the case is that the guy's partners in Mexico, he claims, became jealous of how successful this guy had become as a result of their joint business, and he says that they started threatening his life and tried to take some of this stuff back and have engaged in defamation against him, and so he's trying to get some of that genetic material back from them because it's a partnership gone wrong.
Got it.
Yeah.
I didn't really care about all that. I didn't care about them fighting about whatever.
Mm-hmm.
It's just what I
Yeah.
don't mean to be callous, but
No, but I guess this guy got
what was interesting to me was that this is going on in the first place.
and he got the first ever permit to move. As I understand, he got the first ever permit to move mule deer DNA, genetics, embryos across the border
Yeah,
into
that
the
was
United
the part
States.
that was
That was
interesting.
very
Yeah, and
interesting.
what's happened to that stuff
Once
after
it's
it
in
crosses the
stateside.
border?
Yeah, I think it was in a lab in Texas, or at a breeding facility in Texas, the facility that does both livestock and apparently mule deer.
Yeah, that was the part that was surprising me, because I have been noticing on social media accounts of some of these ranches in Mexico that are offering these really high dollar mule deer hunts.
Mm-hmm.
The staggering numbers of 200-inch, just
Big
one
deer.
after the other, after the other. And I'm like, how could this be true? But it's that they're getting really good. And I'm not saying that, I'm not saying that there's something like nothing criminal. They're getting really good at producing giant mule deer out in the desert by using tricks of the trade developed through whitetail management, meaning bringing in food, water developments, all that. And they're kind of like creating a resource of giant bucks that just wasn't there before by employing strategies developed by, the Texas whitetail community.
Mm-hmm.
So now they've kind of created like the new mule deer. It's like Utah in the 70s down there.
Mm-hmm.
What is it happening behind fences?
It's gotta be.
A lot of it is.
Yeah.
It's
for
got,
sure.
because when you see one of these social media pages I follow, when I've seen enough guys standing there with like a beer in each hand in a golf cart
There you go.
and a 220-inch muley laying there and 16 other guys standing back behind them, I'm like, there's something just like,
Yeah.
there's something that does not make sense.
Worked our tails off.
Well, yeah, I mean, you can take the best areas in the north. Yeah, really. I mean, really in North America, and to have like a success rate of like 3 weeks in a row, 6 people go and all 6 get 30-inch wide bucks.
Mm-hmm.
Like it just doesn't even. It just doesn't happen.
No.
It just does not happen.
It's so weird looking, and part of the problem with it, it's a minor problem, but part of the problem with it is it's gotten to the point with whitetails where if you walk into someone's house and there's certain whitetails you'll see and you'll just know it's not a wild whitetail.
Yeah.
Right? You look and you don't even ask the guy, "Oh, sweet, where'd you get that?" Because you just know. You're like, that's a high fence whitetail. You just know the second you walk in the door. And it winds up being it kind of a little, I don't want to say ruins looking at deer, but with mule deer, I'd always walked in and I've always been like, damn!
Yeah, because they were like, they were unsullied by that.
It was like, holy cow.
Yeah, so does this hurt a little bit more to see this with your beloved mule deer and know that the soul
it
of
hurts
it's-
me.
Well, yeah, I mean, whitetail have been tarnished for so
Yeah.
long, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because those big giants are now knowing that when you see a big giant, now in the back of your head, you gotta be wondering about that. The other thing you just know is when some guy comes back from New Zealand,
Right.
Mm-hmm.
and he's got a 400-inch red stag.
Yeah.
You're like, didn't shoot that? No
Right.
once. Right?
Yeah.
But with mule deer, you're talking like, I don't know what the numbers would be in the United States, but like it's almost like a handful of 200 inchers get shot in the whole country every year.
Yeah,
right.
a handful. I don't know what. It's not more than 50.
Right. So now, when 50 are
It's
coming
probably
back
not more.
every
I
year,
bet it's not more than 20.
Yeah.
No shit. I don't know.
it's not a lot. But now they're just like psh, psh, all coming north from Mexico. It's like you got it ruins
Something's
it a little
really
bit.
wrong when when I'm more apt to ask, "How was the chef?"
Right.
than about your hunt.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know. I have been looking. See, I gotta admit though, man, looking at those Mexico mule deer, I was licking my lips.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, for sure.
Because
yeah.
you don't see those
No.
wide ones
No.
around,
was
I wouldn't
licking my
turn it
lips.
down.
No, I was licking my lips.
But-
Still kind of am.
the other thing to think about, Rad, is like through all the conversations we've had, right? Like that desert environment for big animals, there's just not a lot of them.
Mm-hmm.
But somehow there's a
Right.
lot of them, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
That's. Okay. I'm just gonna sit back in my chair, and someone's gonna explain. Everyone besides me, and then I'm gonna tell you what I think, is gonna talk about this idea that you're gonna breed breed CWD resistance into wild deer?
I could take a first stab at it.
Okay, should I give you my comment now and you can weave that in, or give you my comment later?
I want to see you squirm in your chair for a while, wanting to say it and having to wait.
Yeah, you should just interject naturally.
Sit back. I'm going to take my watch. I'm taking my mouth talker.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Oh, this is the type of juicy stuff people can see at the new YouTube channel.
Yeah. MeatEater Podcast Network.
Does Steve really pull his glasses off?
Steve squirms.
So the cliff notes here is that a peer-reviewed study came out in 2020 or 21 out of Texas A&M, where they had identified genetic markers that can point to the susceptibility of a deer to CWD. Basically saying, hey, these two will tell you with, I think it was 81% rate of accuracy, how susceptible this individual whitetail will be to contracting chronic wasting disease. So with that information in tow, then the next thought that some folks had was, well, if we can identify if a deer is susceptible or not, that means we should be able to selectively breed for those more resistant traits. So Oklahoma proposed a law recently in which they would develop a program to do just that. So this proposal came out that first said, all right, we want to start this program, which will involve, number one, establishing a genetic baseline of what the wild deer population looks like as far as this resistance. Number two, they would then start a captive breeding, selective breeding program in which they would try to breed for this. And then number three is the really big concern, is that starting in 2026, they may create and open up the ability for private individuals to purchase these supposedly CWD resistant deer and release them. And not just on high fence ranches, but low fence. So any Tom, Dick, or Harry could hypothetically start buying these captive bred deer and start releasing them into the wild.
But only in Oklahoma.
Only in Oklahoma. But to my knowledge, there's no other state in which you can
I had to
do
put my
that.
thing back just to say it. And those deer will know they got to stay in Oklahoma, right?
Yeah,
Right,
right.
of course.
As most deer do.
Of course.
Yep.
And so this is like a Pandora's box. There's all sorts of ways this could go wrong that we can get into.
What they're trying to do, right, is like speed up natural selection.
Right.
If it even exists.
I got it. Could I do my thing now? I put my thing back.
Sure.
Yep.
My talker is back in position. Presumably, if it's in captive deer, there's no reason to think that this disposition, this resistance, this natural resistance is also in wild deer.
It's believed that it is.
It's gotta be, right?
Some
like,
degree.
why would it just be there?
Yeah.
When you have millions of wild deer, how in the world do you think that turning out some small handful of deer with a certain genetic characteristic that already exists in wild deer is going to accelerate the natural selection that, if you're right, is already occurring right now? Like, if you're right that there's a resistance and that resistance is going to win out through natural selection, then it already is. You putting one loose.
Yeah.
I mean, like, I'm not even against the idea. Like, I'm not even going down the path of being against the idea. Because let's say there's a version like this. Let's say you had some way.
Well, the version that this idea is based off of, right, is the near eradication of scrapie in sheep.
Okay.
So that's kind of like what they point to as
But
like
that's
see it's
all-
been done.
But that's all domestic.
Yes.
Right.
Where you control all breeding.
Well, here's the thing. We've already basically tested this idea in wild populations of deer, and that is through the act of trying to cull for genetics, right? So there's been all sorts of people in Texas and other parts of the country where they have, very fervently studied the idea of whether or not you can influence genetics within a deer population through culling. spike
shooting
bucks
cold
and things like
bucks.
that. Yeah.
He's got a wonky right side, kill him.
Yep.
He's
so
got
for a
this,
long
he's got
time that was
He looked at me funny.
Yeah.
Right.
So long story short on that, a slew of studies have come out over recent years that have completely disproven that is an effective approach at all. You just can't do it because of the very things you're saying. In a wild population, it's just impossible to actually influence it enough with our, degree of effect. So if that can't work in impacting genetics of whitetail deer, antler quality, same thing's going to be the case with this.
But here's why I don't want to come out and just say I condemn the whole idea of Pandora's box and all that. Because think about this scenario. Let's say for somehow, I don't understand how, but somehow you're able to sample a deer. You're able to shoot it with one of those darts out of a pneumatic gun that they use to shoot tranquilizers. You're able to shoot a deer and pull a genetic sample from it. A little plug, right? Hits the deer, falls off. It's got a little chunk of hair on it. And you're able to determine, okay, that deer has a genetic resistance to CWD. Maybe it's that maybe you realize that deer is 11 years old in an area that has high prevalence of CWD. So you're like, wow, that deer for whatever reason survived. You test it, it doesn't have CWD, even though you got to test them now dead. Let's just say scientifically, that you can test a deer alive, see that it does not have CWD. Also, you can make the determination that it carries this gene that gives it a level of CWD resistance. And then someone proposed, well, let's catch that deer and let's pull all of her eggs and go make 20 more and then turn that group of 20 deer back out on the same landscape where the doe came from. Do you oppose that?
Much less so.
Okay. So I'm saying I'm not all the way thinking that this is the worst idea in the world because there's different ways that it might be approached. I just think it sounds silly because there's no reason to think that this resistance is only in captive deer. All captive deer came from wild deer. They're not from another continent. The captive deer industry, its birth was just catching wild deer from North America. So whatever you're seeing represented in that genetic pool of captive deer is going to be represented in the wild. I would just guess that the same percentage of resistance is out there in the wild. If this whole thing would work, that it's already working or not. And you putting a couple more out there ain't going to make shit for difference.
Going to cost a lot of money.
I mean,
well, and it's going to make someone a lot of money.
Yeah.
That was the other part of that article
Yeah.
was that captive deer interests are involved in this plan.
In the legislature and on the Fish and Game Commission, there are interests that
It
push
almost
this
seems
forward.
like an underhanded way of being able to move deer around.
Exactly.
you know?
And that's where you get into some real sticky worries here is that number one, you can't, like a CWD can lie dormant, can be positive in a deer for several years before we might ever be able to identify that. So you can get many false negatives. So they're going to, let's hypothetically say that a deer tests negative. There are live tests, but they're not terribly accurate. But you could do a test and say, okay, well, this deer supposedly is resistant, and we tested it before release, and it came back negative. 2 years later, that deer could then end up testing positive, and it was positive at that moment, but now we've already released it and transported it across the state all over the place. So we could be
I have to
propagating-
assume they're only going to cut these loose in areas of high prevalence anyway.
Maybe so.
If someone was going to do it prophylactically, I think that would be hugely problematic.
Right
People
now,
think
there's
prophylactics are always
Oh,
Go
my
on.
rubbers.
my father-in-law.
They're not.
My father-in-law
Please
uses the word
enlighten everyone.
prophylactically in any number of contexts.
A toothbrush is a
Yeah.
prophylactic.
Yeah.
To do it prophylactically, no one is going to get into that. No one is going to be for that.
Well, right now, I think a huge thing to keep in mind is there's no consensus on what resistance is.
Mm-hmm.
So, is the deer that dies a day after the other group of deer more resistant?
Oh,
Like,
yeah.
to some people, yes.
He lived a year longer.
Right. That's another huge question mark as to why people who are conservatively approaching this topic are like, well, this step is putting the cart way before the horse because we don't even know what resistance is at this point.
The release program, yeah.
But give me the Pandora's box. I'm failing to see it. I can see it as a waste of effort because of like I said, it's like you're trying to go into a populations that have tens of thousands of animals, and you're thinking you're going to influence it with some small number of released animals. But give me the Pandora's box, because these aren't GMOs. These are just deer these are just white-tailed deer with
Oticolianus virginianus.
They're white-tailed deer from the continent. They're not genetically modified. You're not doing gene insertion. They're not robo deer. They are a deer that you have identified having some potential disease resistance.
I'll give you mine.
And you let it run out. Like, give me the negative.
Yeah, I mean, the simple one right now is I know we covered like the first known CWD hotspot, but we have a lot of other known CWD hotspots. They, for the most part, all tend to be at or very near close proximity to captive cervid facilities.
Correct.
So, haven't we already seen the Pandora's box? Like, we have captive cervid facilities. Just so happens,
like a
lot of CWD
a
around
new
there.
case shows up, and
Right.
5 miles away.
So now
Yeah.
we're thinking we're going to throw it back into the court of the captive cervid facility. Let's see what you guys come up with next. I'm sure it's got to be better than current CWD.
And then what
are
about
the
this?
chances something like that would happen again?
Right.
Yeah.
Yes.
I got you.
And we're creating this hypothetically would create a private market for individuals to purchase captively bred deer and release them into the wild, which we've never done before. And I just can't imagine a future in which, okay, if captive breeding facilities can start breeding these animals and marketing them to the general public, right? Trying to convince folks to buy these deer and release these CWD resistant deer. You can't tell me that 10, 20 years down the road, not only will they market them as CWD resistant, but also this came from 180-inch genetics. So you can start releasing your selectively bred mega antlered deer. All of a sudden now that's not just a high fence thing, but any guy could go and start releasing these on their.
Yeah, that's Pandorian.
And it's not the same as like introduce. I mean, obviously it's the same species. It's a native species, but it has like this bucket biology kind of feel to it.
Yeah.
Where it's like
It's just a very slippery slope.
moving
and it's so,
moving wild animals around. It's just
I like what I think that that was very Pandorian of hey, now that I can start buying deer and cutting them loose, I want that CWD thing you're talking about, but like, can you send a picture of the buck?
Yeah, exactly.
For sure. Well, but you just pointed out that that's not actually true.
What do you mean? Oh, well, right. But that doesn't mean people will try.
Yeah. I get it. Here's the biggest thing I can see. Not the big. I shouldn't say that. Here's the thing I think that's noteworthy about this issue. Here you have the captive cervid industry has been villainized for years around CWD, and imagine how when you're looking at this as a PR problem, that you'd be able to come back around and turn this whole thing on its head and emerge as the savior. That's got to be an intriguing.
That's exactly what's happening.
That's got to feel good.
well. I think too one of the issues with the law that just passed, at least from what I've seen pointed out, is that it's not just like looking at this idea, but it's laying out. It's not only putting the cart before the horse; it's like paving that road, and there's like a timeline for this to happen, and before it's like determined whether or not this is really feasible. There's like
2026, a
Yeah.
target date,
yeah,
like a year and a half out. And we didn't mention this at the beginning. when I led this off, I said this law was proposed. This isn't just a proposed law now. This is a passed and signed law. This is happening.
Do you think they could work up a skunk that don't smell and cut him loose?
He wouldn't be a skunk anymore.
Yeah.
But yeah, they could, like, when they're marketing their big giant bucks, they can be like, disease-free 250 incher, you know? Sell it that way.
All right.
A skunk that just shoots out Febreze.
All right. You want to hear a guy's suggestion to the Michigan DNR while we're on the subject of deer?
Yeah.
Sure do.
I've heard a few in my day.
My family owns a farm, and this is not me. We don't own a farm in southern Michigan. This is someone that wrote in. My family owns a farm in southern Michigan, and every year we require everyone who hunts with us to kill does on our property. For at least the last decade, there have been multiple processors in our area that would accept cleaned deer as donations free of charge. I would regularly drop off donations throughout the season. I have always made it a habit of regularly calling processors. I should preface this by saying this. The head of Michigan's DNR, was it last fall, the year before, basically wrote a public letter.
Yeah. The deer biologist of Michigan.
Saying we need to kill more does and we can't get people to kill does. We reported on that, and I got a call from Doug Duran reminding me that I have often said when someone tells you there's too many blank, there's too many deer, there's too many whatever, there's too many bears, always ask by whose measure. Because I like to point out, I don't know elk hunters. I never hear an elk hunter telling me there's too many elk. Right? People go out, they want to see elk. People go out deer hunting, they want to see deer. So when they hear there's too many deer, it puzzles them. They didn't feel like they saw too many deer. They want to see more deer. But they feel they have too many deer and they can't get people to kill does.
And Chad did a good job in that email and that note articulating the why. I do think he did a good job of trying to explain to the general hunting public of Michigan that, addressing that question. Like, hey, I understand you want to see a lot of deer, but here are the possible negative outcomes of this situation.
He goes on to say, this year, none of our processors accepted donations at all. It was explained to me by the processors that the state of Michigan now requires that each donation must be CWD screened, which takes 2 to 3 weeks. Then a random meat sample from every donated deer needed to be state evaluated for metal from bullet fragments. That translates into deer hanging in processors or being stored in their freezers for weeks. Therefore, because of that storage problem, they're not willing or able to participate in the program. He's saying, I can kill 20 to 25 does a year. But without being able to donate the meat, it's almost impossible for him to kill that many does. He also goes on to say, why are they charging $20 for an antlerless deer tag? You should price them to sell and sell them at $5. He also says Michigan ends their deer season in January. Why don't they let it run into the spring if they really want to get killed does? I'll say, too bad you can't donate your deer. Have you tried this? Have you tried putting up a sign, just like how normal people put up no trespassing signs? Have you tried putting up signs that say, please deer hunt my place? You will get a lot of does killed. Or say, put up signs that say, if you're interested in harvesting whitetail does, contact me at blank.
Put an ad in the local paper.
Put an ad in the local paper. If you're looking for a place to hunt does with your kids, please contact me at blank. I think you will get a lot of does killed.
Even at $20 a piece.
Although I know that
Sorry,
it's
$20
enough of a problem where he's writing in about it.
I think what we found though is that I can't remember if this was Russ Mason with the DNR at one point or if it was Chad, but someone I spoke to basically said no matter how they liberalize the regulations with doe harvest, no matter how many tags they give out, no lever they can push has been able to significantly increase doe harvest.
I mean, let's keep it open until early February.
Yeah.
You're not gonna kill any more does.
There's just people have a certain number they're willing to,
but if this guy wants to kill does, and now he can't shoot them because they don't want to accept them at the donation place, I have a feeling in Michigan, hunters would be really helpful. Good old hunters.
I don't think that it's a bad idea though to consider new ideas like a free doe tag with every buck.
Well, I also think
having hunters come.
If he opened up
Doug
his land,
Duran wants to shoot does. You know how Doug Duran gets 40 does removed off his place?
I had a back.
Take a guess.
Got a line out the door.
I had a back and forth.
Come shoot the does, please. And what happens? People show up, start shooting does. 40 a year.
I had an exchange with this gentleman because the first thing I did was recommend checking out Doug's organization.
Sharing the land?
Sharing the land.
Sharing the land.
I was going to say saving the land, and that's not
Sharing
right.
the land,
Sharing the
yep.
land. And he's going to look into that. But in the past, he shared with me that he has opened up the land to hunters, and it's just caused some problems.
Well, not with Doug's program because
That's
Doug vets all the people.
That's exactly
You have
what
to
I
go
said.
through the application process to participate in
That's
sharing
what
the
I
land.
said. I thought that the bar would maybe be much higher. So
One of the funniest conversations I had around this issue is Cal and I. This is Cal's. I'm going to steal Cal's joke. Cal and I were hunting on a place in Hawaii, a coffee plantation in Hawaii, where they have a lot of problem with pigs rooting everything up. I said, I'll tell you one way to get rid of these pigs. Put up a sign that says, come hunt pigs. And he said, do you know what kind of people we would get if we put up a sign like that? And Cal said, barbecuers.
I am so funny.
I could see the problem this guy's having becoming more common though with donation programs.
Oh, yeah.
you
well,
know?
and then I mean, I guess to the point made by the Michigan DNR, if he opens up his place, there's probably no increased doe harvest in that county, right? It's like the people that are going to come shoot a doe in his place aren't going to go shoot one somewhere else.
Well,
Listen, that's not true.
I don't know.
Well,
about,
I'm just basing that off.
There's a person I was just talking with
Yeah.
at my mom's where I grew up. Okay. This individual, his grandfather hunted, his father hunted. He just didn't get into it. Now he has a boy. And it skipped a generation with him. Just was never interested in it. His boy is dying to go deer hunting. But here he's sort of missed this whole thing of like he doesn't know how the whole thing works. That guy and that kid would go shoot a shitload of those does. In his mind, he's like, the more I think about it, I would just eat that deer meat.
Yeah, I'm just saying the macro. I don't know if it would have the sort of macro effect that.
Are you thinking like local hunters equate to doe harvest versus the further away you get from the hunting spot, people are less interested in traveling to shoot a doe?
No, I'm just thinking about the idea that liberalizing doe harvest or liberalizing hunting seasons doesn't seem to generate more dead does.
I think if you
according
give
to DNR.
Yep.
if you give people who will shoot does more places to shoot does, more does will get shot.
If you went
if you went to
I
Michigan,
Michigan,
I didn't say this as like I'm fully convinced of it. I just
Yep.
sort of threw
I
that
hear
out
you.
as like a
as a Michigander,
yeah.
Mark's a Michigander. I'm telling you this. If everyone in Michigan that wanted to shoot a doe this year had a place to shoot a doe, there wouldn't be no does.
So
There wouldn't.
Yeah.
I gotta tell you about a pretty cool idea, an interesting example of this problem. I've been pretty involved with the Field to Fork program in Michigan and on the Back 40, and a couple of the new hunters that have gone through that program are similar to the type of person you're describing. Somebody who wants more meat. They're getting into hunting. They're trying to find ways to fill the freezer, And the biggest problem they've had is finding places to do it. And so at first, they started trying to hunt public land, and then they've tried to get private access, and they continue to struggle. Like, go to a lot of places, and there's guys that are already hunting it, or there's people that will let them hunt, but they're really just focused on bucks, that they don't want them in there hunting for does when their guys are there hunting for bucks. But they bumped into a farmer, and this farmer brought up the fact that he gets these depredation permits, and he has 25 or 50 doe tags a year and can never get enough people to use them.
Really?
Mm-hmm. And he would love these deer to get shot, but can't get anyone to do it.
Really?
So my two friends said, well, hey, that's all we want. We want to shoot does. And hey, we don't mind doing it in the summer. That's great. We'll do it. And so they have started, and I'm jumping the gun for them here, but they are going to pilot a program this year in which they try to connect new hunters looking for access, trying to find ways to kill deer, with farmers with depredation permits who want does killed. So get a bunch of new hunters who want to have an opportunity to do this out there in the summer when nobody else wants to do it, but they don't care that they can't shoot bucks because they don't care about shooting a buck. They just want to shoot some does. So this year they're going to be doing that, and we'll see how it goes.
Heck yeah.
The summer thing
how
is
low do they
interesting.
want deer? Like, I always get a little. As soon as people come up with like great deer extermination ideas, I always get like a little nervous.
Sure.
We've been through this before. Remember, I just read a minute ago. I killed 33 bald eagles in one day.
Right. All of a sudden, you're like, boy, there's not a lot of bald eagles around.
And then they got to a point where they had to put them on the ESA, right? So,
Doug always brings up earn a buck, but it's
everybody got pissed.
Was it effective though?
Yeah.
Well,
other than making people pissed?
I don't know. He had. I wish Doug was here to explain it, but I'm sure this wasn't so widespread that it negated the program, but it spawned this whole industry of, can I borrow your dough?
But what I do,
can I borrow your dough so I can go get.
As I understand it, though, the rate of CWD spread during that time period was significantly lower as compared to when they removed that. It's like this kind of trend dramatically increased because they were able to slow down. They were able to increase harvest and slow that spread. And when they removed that tool from the toolbox, it changed things.
Yeah.
And it also, from the folks that I know in Wisconsin who were interested in having a more natural deer herd and balanced age structure, balanced buck to doe ratio, things were a lot better during that time period on that
During
front as
earn
well.
a buck.
Yep.
We should clarify, just in case someone's new to wildlife politics and all that. When we're talking about wanting to reduce deer numbers, wanting to lower deer numbers, there's historically been a single driver. The single driver's been agricultural damage. Right?
Yep.
Well, you're saying why people would want to do that?
Historically.
And insurance companies.
Well,
But
at
I've
this
heard
point-
that's kind of like, I used to cite that, and then I've read in places where people have tried to go in and search, like, sort of the powerful car insurance lobby moving to lower deer numbers. I think it's kind of a thing that's not, I could be wrong. Someone could write in if they found otherwise. That's been kind of proven as a thing that's like not true.
Yeah, the farm lobby has a lot of pull with
That I always
commissions,
thought
you
that
know.
the auto insurers, someone's like, that's like an urban legend. The auto insurers were leaning on state game agencies to lower deer populations, to lower claims. If someone can contradict that, I don't really know. I always cited that, and then I can't even remember who told me that it's kind of horseshit. I don't know.
Just on the doe harvest side of things, I got to go hang out with Doug for opening weekend and a few days after. I was shocked at the just general buck activity, despite what to my tender Montana ears sounded like an absolute battle going on for 3 days straight. More shots opening morning than I would hear walking around in Western Hills in a whole season. And
That's the big hunt for you.
oh dude,
And still seeing bucks running around.
and
yeah.
still seeing bucks running around. I shot a really cool bigger buck and went to drag it out to the closest like 4-wheeler track road, and kind of came into this opening where one of Doug's buddies had been shooting all morning. Shooting would be the accurate description. And it looked like a scene from like The Walking Dead. There were does legs up everywhere you looked in this field to the degree that I was like, you know what? I'm just going to fade back into the canopy and wait until it's dark before I go walking out into this field.
Huh.
But the proximity, kind of going back to this guy writing in, to a processor is really close. You know, you start stacking up all those does, it's a lot of work. But like there's a big part of me that wants to go back, just shoot does, take them to that processor because the bratwurst was so good. Unbelievable.
Cal's brats.
Holy shit. It's nuts. And I like making sausage, but that's a lot of work too.
Back to this thought for a second. Historically, too many deer meant too much agricultural damage. That's still an issue. I'm just trying to explain that. Where are people getting the idea of too many deer? Where is it coming from? Now it's that remains constant, agricultural damage. And there's this other idea laid on that too many deer, too dense of populations of deer facilitates an accelerated disease transmission.
And two other things.
Oh, please.
You've got herd health things, and you have habitat health as well. So when you have, like, in Doug's area, so many deer, he has a really hard time, seeing oak regeneration. There's many, many states across the country where you have these browse lines where it's nothing 5 feet and down, and then you see leaf structure again. So we see all sorts of cascading biodiversity effects by these exorbitantly high whitetail deer populations, which then, and this is, I think, where the standard deer hunter becomes interested, when you have a unnaturally high deer population, your deer hunting experience, this might be different than you would imagine, but it's not going to be as great because you're going to see a whole lot of deer, but you're not going to see a lot of natural deer behavior that you would in a more balanced, healthy deer herd. When you have a relatively balanced doe to buck ratio, you are going to see a much more exciting rut. Bucks are actually going to do rutting things. They're going to be chasing, they're going to be fighting, they're going to be doing all that kind of stuff. You're going to have, when you have way too many does compared to bucks, it's going to stagger and mess up the breeding, and the fawn drop and things like that all get out of whack. And so you have this kind of cascade of different effects when you do not have the natural balance that you achieve when you have some level of, it's like 30 does to 1 buck is just not natural. We get that in some of these states and these very, very, very high deer populations. It messes a lot of stuff up that impacts not only the habitat, but our experience as hunters too.
Okay, so ag, disease, and Mark Kenyon. Anything else on that?
No.
Man, we're going to get all into governor's tags. Let's save that, Corinne.
You think so? I mean,
I think we should.
I've been
just-
saving that one for a while. I feel
Yeah.
like.
I think if we do it, it's gonna we're gonna generate a longer format conversation in the future. So I'd say we
But I
just
don't-
talk about it because we can do it pretty
Yeah.
quick.
Okay. What's that? You got time. Okay. Tell me, let me tee it up.
Are we gonna give our own like thumbs up, thumbs down on our thoughts?
How many times have I told the story about the GMO guy that came on?
4?
4 times. Here's the 5th. I'm not going to do it. It's my favorite quote of all time. Actually, my favorite quote of all time was from Ike Turner, but I'm not going to tell that quote. Governor's tags. All right. Picture you have a wildlife resource. Do I really have to do this? Picture you have a wildlife resource where the demand exceeds the supply.
Wildly exceeds.
Where the demand wildly exceeds the supply. In this case, we'll talk about bighorn sheep. You have thousands and thousands of people in every western state want to draw a bighorn sheep tag, but there's only 100 or 200 or 50 available, or in the case of Texas, 1 available. How do you allocate those tags? Generally, historically, in this country, we have given them out in a democratic fashion, which is consistent with our wildlife management values, where we have lotteries. You send in a few bucks, your name, as we say, your name goes into a hat, and there is a lottery drawing, and you pull them out. At some point in time, I was hoping to get a governor's tag expert on to talk about the inception of governor's tags. At some point in time, I don't know when, someone had the bright idea to say, man, why don't we do that? Like, give them out to all the little people through lottery, but let's just sell one and see how much it goes for. And then we'll take all that money, because that's going to look horrible, but we'll take all that money and use it for sheep habitat. And they said, let's just see what happens. Well, it turns out that what happens is this. People are willing to pay $100,000, $200,000, $300,000, $400,000, and now close to $500,000 to jump in line. A line that you might not ever get to the front of if you're a Joe Blow.
Most people will never get.
They'll never get to the front of the line. And it turns out that getting to the front of the line on a bighorn sheep tag is worth regularly hundreds of thousands of dollars.
And it's not, and the idea was so successful in raising money that it spread out to a bunch of other species too.
Yep. Then they're like, well, shit, let's try that with deer. Let's try it with elk. Try it with antelope. Anything where the demand exceeds the supply. With that said, take it away.
Well, there's only a finite number of tags, right?
Well, I just said that.
So when someone with the money can go in there and win that auction, that tag is coming from a pool of tags.
I don't agree with that.
That
I don't think it comes from the pool. I think they made an extra.
Okay.
Because you're laughing.
You just said there's like...
I am laughing.
Well, because think of how they did it. Think of how Arizona did. Arizona spawned this whole conversation, because I'll point out, just a spoiler alert, Arizona's game commission voted to get rid of governor tags. In Arizona, when you get a governor's tag, your tag, like if you draw a bighorn tag in Arizona, you have a season and a unit. When you buy the governor's tag, to sweeten the deal, this is insane seeming. To sweeten the deal, they said, oh, in your season, buddy, 365 days is your hunting season, and you can hunt any unit that is open to sheep hunting. That tag did not come out of the pool.
Even if it didn't, that guy goes, let's say you're the one dude who draws the bighorn tag in a unit.
Yep.
The governor's guy goes in there and shoots the big ram in there.
Oh, yeah, and he's got months.
Right.
He can do it. When you find out your season opens like September 15th, that son of a bitch has all summer to hunt that unit.
So I will say, like, in the state of Idaho, there's a governor's tag. For the numbers increased, but Hell's Canyon, the Hell's Canyon tag, arguably the best bighorn sheep tag in the state of Idaho, is at 1. There's 1 tag.
Mm-hmm.
This was, I don't know what it's at right now, but at the time, 1 tag. And they factored in that there's a 99% chance that if the governor's tag, or whoever gets the governor's tag, is gonna
hunt that unit,
which is why there's 1 tag.
Oh, because it would have been 2.
Okay,
so there's
one extra.
Yes,
it's not necessarily taking a tag out of the pool, but there's going to be 1 more dead ram.
Yep. Now, I got to, before we even get into some listener feedback on this, I got to say, I am so torn on the issue that it is one of the very few areas of wildlife politics where I do not have an opinion.
Bullshit.
Yeah.
You can think of a lot of stuff that I don't have an opinion on.
This is the one area
One
where
of the
you
areas.
do not have Stephen Rinella tattooed on his gravestone.
Yeah. Can't think of anything good or bad to say about him.
No. I can think of all kinds of good and bad stuff
I mean,
to say about
I
it.
think
No, not that I don't know. I didn't mean that. I have conflicting opinions.
Yeah.
Meaning, okay, you're right, Cal. I'll phrase it differently. If I was emperor of the country and they said, oh yeah, one last thing. What about governor's tags? I'd be like, I still haven't decided.
Okay.
I got to think about it longer.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I meant.
I just, when I think about it, I go back to what's better for the resource in the end. And in the
Governor's
end,
tags.
the governor's $1 million in habitat restoration
Better for the resource.
is better for the resource.
What's
Better
better
for
for
the
us emotionally?
Right.
Well,
no
but
governor's tags.
It's better for the resource, but it's not. It doesn't.
It'd
It's
be
not
better
in
for
line
the
with the North
resource.
American model.
it'd be
in
better
any
for the
way
resource
whatsoever.
if you have 10 governor's tags, right? If it's simply about maximizing
Right.
the
Slippery slope.
the market value,
Slippery slope.
or the economic value of those wildlife resources, you'd auction all the tags.
Right.
I think
Can I hit
there's
some
one.
of these emails.
If
Or you
if
got-
we
or
Well,
you
have
I was going to
say-
say that the email from the guy in Arizona, I think, pointed out something that's relevant to us here in Montana, and that is that there are other ways of
Yes.
allocating these special opportunities, and one of which is because I believe he pointed out that in Arizona they're not doing away with.
Well, I'll tell you what he said. Unless you'd like to read it.
No, go ahead.
It was so well
Yeah.
worded. I think it
yeah,
warrants.
I think yeah.
This gentleman describes himself as someone who has been intimately involved in the commission appointments and Arizona wildlife policy. And he wrote in a bullet-pointed email. He goes on to say, the rhetoric that Arizona votes to eliminate governor's tags is wrong. Okay. How could that be true? Well, he says this. Arizona has, quote, special big game tags, which are administered by the Game and Fish Department, along with other tags, rather than the more political administration of governor's tags in other states. Okay? So he's saying they don't actually have a thing, they don't have a pool called governor's tags. They have special big game tags. He's getting a little bit into semantics here, but that's fine. The Arizona Game and Fish Commission did not eliminate special big game tags. They voted to phase out the practice of allocating these tags through an auction process in order to rely more on raffles. So he's making a semantic argument. They don't call them governor's tags, but in defense of our language, they are functionally
Colloquially,
they are colloquially, functionally governor's tags. Well, it's not the governor.
When you think of a governor's tag, that's what it looks like.
It's an auction tag.
Now, is
Yeah.
will the raffle? Do they believe the raffle will bring in equivalent funds?
What did the Montana
To be
mule
determined.
deer-
I don't think so. But let me go on. Since 2009, this is the same individual. Since 2009, auction tags, okay, so what we've been calling governor's tags, auction tags, have accounted for 70% of the $32.4 million raised by special tags, with raffle tags raising 30%, or nearly $10 million.
My question would be, how many tags were auctioned and how many were raffled?
I was wondering the same thing. I wish this email got into that, but he gives information where you would go find it because he sends in a whole slide presentation on the subject. Now he goes on to say, while the sheep and mule deer tags have generated eye-popping headlines, the department's data shows that for other species, including turkey, bison, coos deer, black bear, mountain lion, javelina, pronghorn, raffle tags generate more than auction tags. Okay, so it's species dependent. He has another thing. The notion that Arizona, and now I don't think he got this from us, but the notion that Arizona is becoming purple and therefore the commission is being influenced by anti-hunting interests is flat out wrong. Oh, I know where this came from. There's a guy that's coming on the podcast, and I'm going to let him put this in his own phrasing. We have a guest in the future coming on the podcast who felt that the move against governor's tags was a anti-hunting thing. Okay? And I might have quoted him on that. Like that it's anti-hunters arguing against governor's tags.
Oh, interesting.
How dare they auction off the life of an animal?
Oh, interesting. Okay.
But this individual who will be coming on the podcast expressed to me, I don't want to say his name because it was a private conversation and I don't want to quote him on it, expressed to me that he felt like it was a loss to the anti-hunters.
Interesting.
This guy says that's flat out wrong. The commissioners very clearly articulated their reasons for taking this step. Retired U.S. Army Lieutenant General Jeff Buchanan said he understood the argument that the ends justify the means. Meaning he understands the argument that, hey, it's a lot of money, but it's not democratic. And he says, we cannot compromise our values to make money. Meaning it might be ugly to auction off hunting opportunities when you have people that in ways in which it excludes the general population. Sure, but that's true, but it's a compromise of our values. Therefore, the money shouldn't matter. He also cited founding principles of this nation in inserting that we should not be setting aside a special privilege for the rich and elite. He spent 37 years in the military. That's not what he was there defending. Okay? He was not there to defend special privileges for the rich and elite. He was there to defend all Americans, which influenced his decision that governor tags are un-American. Former chair, James, sorry, I'm going to mutilate this name. James Goner was cited, among other concerns, the concentration of these tags in just a few hands. Meaning, check this out, 36 governor's tags have fallen into the hands of 3 individuals.
Wow.
Which is also in the slide. He goes on to say these individuals are not sympathetic to anti-hunting advocates. Should I keep going about this guy? This guy's good.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's all good info.
I served as a policy advisor to the previous Arizona governor and was personally involved in the selection of several of these commissioners. I am intimately familiar with the process for the appointment of the others and can state confidently. Confidently. Why am I saying? I'm trying to say confidentially.
Confidentially.
But he's saying confidently.
He can state with confidence.
There you go.
That the wishes of anti-hunters played no role in these appointments. I was similarly very closely involved in the banning of trail cameras in the state for taking of wildlife, as were a number of these commissioners. I can tell you personally that the decision was driven by hunters for the benefit of hunters and our model of wildlife conservation. To see either of these actions as being motivated by anti-hunting forces is just flat out wrong.
Yeah.
Chuck.
I like that guy.
Yep.
It's a good email.
Okay. Who wants to do email number 2?
I can read it. I haven't read it before.
Ooh, I'm looking forward to email number 3.
This is from Mark, not the guy that's sitting next to me, but he describes himself as a spare time economist and a spare time hunter. The idea that governor's tags or any other market mechanisms to manage scarce wildlife resources counter the democratic allocation pillar of the North American model of wildlife conservation is a misconception held by many conservationists and hunters. When discussing a scarce resource like a bighorn sheep tag, a random draw isn't democratic in the same way electing a president is. Everyone doesn't vote for who gets the tag. John Stickovich of Cleveland, Ohio, isn't the favorite to win because he saved an 11-month-old baby from a burning building and deserves it the most. Parentheses, true story. Random draws are just one imperfect way to allocate resources when demand exceeds supply. It just so happens that it is an indisputably suboptimal way to do so.
No, he's contradicting himself. A merit-based system is not democratic. In this case, that's merit-based. Does he really think we're going to hold an election to see who gets the governor's tag?
Yeah,
Everybody's essays need to be due now. The debate's going to be held halfway through.
it's democratic in the sense of everyone's equal before the law, like democratic culture,
Yes.
not we're voting on who gets
merit-based
the tag.
system, if the governor was given the tag and the governor could honor a person who deserved it on merit, it would open up big problems with cronyism.
Sure it would.
Yeah.
Wouldn't raise money either.
But
You
let's let the guy
shouldn't-
finish
so-
his argument.
He's saying the market will decide who's right or wrong.
Mm-hmm.
You shouldn't take seriously state game agencies complaining about managing white-tailed doe populations while still charging for licenses to hunt them. If they were really felt that there were too many deer on the landscape, they would reimburse hunters for shooting does, not charge them.
All right, I'm done.
In general,
there
game agencies,
there would be no state agency.
In general, game agencies' unwillingness to manage
that
the
they had to run
economics-
at a deficit. Not that state agencies can get revenue to fund biologists. I got an idea. How about the state agency now that we've stripped its funding source anyways, now needs to pay people to hunt does.
Yep.
Email 3.
The email, yeah. Oh, I am, as Steve put it, a way-ass pro governor's tag person. Who wants to read that one?
I can jump
There
in.
you go, Brody.
While it may be true that people used to have a we're all in it together attitude, and that years ago one was not able to pay extra to skip lines at Disneyland or board an airplane faster, this tier system is most certainly not new. An argument could be made that the average American today is today more aware of the financial tier systems that inherently exist in a capital society than they were 30, 40, or 50 years ago. But the fact that rich people are able to buy things that are either coveted or rare and thus expensive, while poor middle-class people are unable to buy such things, is in no way a surprise to anyone, nor has it ever been a surprise to anyone. The foundation of this argument is exactly equal opportunity means and where it exists in our North American model of wildlife conservation. I'm not following that. Regarding the draw system, which is integral to our conservation model, equal opportunity means that every American has an equal right to apply. It does not mean that every American has an equal ability to apply. Someone who has the financial means to apply across multiple states of which they are not a resident stands a much greater chance of being successful in a draw by virtue of having entered more draws. In the opposite, someone who does not have the financial means has a significantly lower probability of successfully drawing a tag. There's inherent inequality in this, but it is in financial ability, not opportunity to apply.
Mm-hmm.
In the very same vein,
He's going to
everyone
get to this. He's going to get to, and since anyone can bid on a governor's tag,
Right. In the very same vein, everyone is afforded the equal opportunity or right of bidding on a governor's tag, yet not everyone is afforded an equal financial ability. The person with the greater financial means will be more successful in terms of attaining a tag. The buck stops here. There.
I think
you know what? Can you read his last sentence?
There's a litany of other pro-governor's tag arguments, but I believe this to be the most compelling. Sincerely, Saxton.
Now, when I hear a name like Saxton,
you're immediately suspicious.
I think he's got grease. He's got jingle.
Right.
It
I'm
does
like,
sound that
of
way.
course Saxton is
sound that way.
pro-government.
A dude named
Or
Saxton
pro-governor
has
tag.
like because rich people know how to name their kids to sound rich.
Right.
I don't
get
get
Old
it.
money
Yeah.
name.
I don't get that. Like,
This is a better argument.
it is a
for
better
sure.
argument, but the whole like where it exists in our North American model, like, you know, it's not the king's deer, so I'm not sure what he's getting.
Well, yeah, I mean, this right is an argument that you could apply to anything, right? It's
Yeah.
like, well, the system's messed up,
yeah,
so why pick on this part of the system?
Yep.
Cherry pick this when this is already messed up over here too. If you're really invested in making it equitable and democratic, then you need to tear down this part of the system.
I'm gonna sum up email 4.
Yep.
I'm just gonna sum it up. Y'all's jealous. People jealous about all kinds of stuff. They don't realize they're jealous. Y'all's jealous of people who can buy governor's tags. That's what this is all about.
Yep.
I mean, I think the one of the things that the argument about if you can't afford it, you're just whining is that we own the wildlife.
Right.
Right. And so it's not the same as like going to Disneyland and paying to cut in line. It's a public resource and
that everyone
everybody has a right to say how they think it should be managed.
This guy goes on to here's email number 5. He's like, hey man, I'm torn. Here's a couple questions. Why is there only one tag? If one tag is worth $600, then why not sell 2 tags for $1.2 million? Two, his second question. Is the amount raised truly the thing that allows this to be considered? If the tag went for $20,000 one year rather than $600,000, would it still be worth violating the North American conservation model? Or is it the amount of money?
Yeah. What? There's definitely a
What's
threshold.
the threshold?
Yeah, definitely a threshold. All good questions.
Here's another question he's got. I believe asking, are governor's tags good, hides behind words. The true question then is, are our ethical beliefs for sale? In pointing out this threshold. We'll do it for 6. We'll do it. Let's not do extremes. We'll do it for 200. Not gonna do that for 10. Okay. Yeah. At what point do we go like, well, for that amount of money? I think there was a movie about this.
Oh
wasn't
yeah,
there?
no, it's
Demi Moore, some guy,
Indecent
Woody
proposal?
Harrelson.
right.
Yeah, they're like a loyal couple, but she could get a bunch of grease, which is slang for jingle.
Mm-hmm.
Which is slang for
Pay $1 million to sleep with your with one night
Yeah,
with your
there's-
wife.
Everyone has a price.
Leaving Las Vegas, not leaving Las Vegas. What was the that one movie that Nick Cage did?
Raising Arizona.
I think you
That's
could
the
see
best
just
movie
the
he ever
opposite though. If it was only 20,000, people would be like, "Oh, that's cool," but they wouldn't get so pissed about it.
Because of email number 4, because y'all's jealous,
Mm-hmm.
and you're more jealous of a dude with massive grease.
Totally, because you're like, I know that 700,000 for that Antelope Island mule deer tag, like it's like a drop in the bucket for that guy. He doesn't give a shit.
What if it went the opposite way though? What if I told you that such and such Saxton guy was going to put in $30 million, enough to pay double the entire
Saxon
states?
von Bueller the Seventh.
Yeah. What if it was such an astronomical amount that it could change everything that state was able to do? Is there a tier where it's like undeniably useful? We have to.
Right? I mean,
yeah. If someone said, "Hey, man, I'm going to give you $1 billion, and you can take that $1 billion and spend it on wildlife habitat, but here's the rub: I'm going to shoot one of them sheep."
And he's just gonna, yeah. And that sheep would have died that winter anyway.
Right.
Yep.
We're giving Musk some ideas here.
Yeah. Would you have said no?
We should introduce into evidence the Montana BHA experiment this year.
Yeah,
Then we're going to finish.
Yeah.
Corinne wrote end.
which is raffle v auction, right? And I think there's a bunch of ways that I find to be like irrefutable that this should, if we're going to do fundraising this way, it should be through raffle, not through auction.
Mm-hmm.
And like the wild sheep situation is the best example that we have, right? Like there's no data out there that says, you know, a hell of a lot more people would be invested in bighorn sheep conservation if they had some way to access bighorn sheep or even the opportunity
Mm-hmm.
at bighorn
So
sheep.
there's no data supporting that.
Right.
Yeah.
But you're like, okay, you could have your name in the hat for a bighorn sheep tag for $5, but that chance doesn't really exist, right?
Yeah.
But at the same time, like once a year, we all gather in a room and we pat each other on the backs by being like, that dude is getting his 3rd World Slam of Sheep. What a conservationist.
Yeah.
Right? And $650,000. Ah, what a conservationist. Right?
Mm-hmm.
That same conservationist can buy $650,000 worth of raffle tickets, right? And be like, what a great conservationist. He's just not guaranteed the sheep hunt to go with it.
Yeah. Well, here's the thing, though. My wife recently bid on a thing where you get to go get donuts with the school resource officer
Mm-hmm.
in a fundraiser for the school.
Yep.
It's like donuts with Tom the cop.
Uh-huh.
She could have just given that money and not gone to donuts with that cop.
But he's super good looking and the donuts are great.
But he listens to her. He's not eavesdropping on the neighboring tables.
1,000% attention when she's talking.
It was actually the intention was that our kids would get to go get donuts with the cops. I don't like this. I don't like this insinuation.
Steve's like,
This
how good looking is
insinuation
that cop?
that my wife
look into
needs to
this.
go to donuts with a cop in order to be heard.
Okay, so the Montana example that Randall brought up, Montana BHA gets the statewide mule deer tag this year, and typically the state will give it to different conservation groups as that fundraising mechanism.
Yep.
The very typical way of fundraising with a tag, right? The conservation group doesn't get the money from the tag. The conservation group gets to use that tag as kind of like the carrot to bait folks into a fancy banquet where that tag gets auctioned off.
Oh, that's how that works?
Yep.
And then
So
they
it's like-
raffle off a bunch of other things
And then they raffle off a bunch of other
Yeah.
things.
to make their money.
Right. But this,
It's a decoy.
yes.
Really?
Yeah. Yep. Because, you know,
I don't know how I thought it worked, but I didn't know that.
well, because of arguments like this, right?
Yeah.
These states that have those tags, that money has got to go back to the conservation of that species, for the habitat of that species, for the benefit of bighorn sheep or moose or goats or
Got
mule
it.
deer,
Yeah.
right?
No, yeah, everything you're saying makes sense. I just never thought
I
of it
think
that
they
way.
get a cut, or they can take a cut.
I think, yeah, there's like but it's outlined in here, right?
Yeah,
so
yeah.
it's
but
like the-
you're right. It doesn't go into their general fund.
right.
Yeah.
The
Right.
handling fee, you know.
Yep.
It's $20 a chance, but your card gets dinged for $22.50 type of thing. So, anyway, what was interesting here is, like we talked about, like you put in $600,000 at auction, but you could put $600,000 into the raffle if you really wanted to do that. Nobody did that. So, historically, the highest price the statewide Montana mule deer tag has ever gone for was $41,000. A lot of money for a mule deer tag. Nowhere near the amount of money that mule deer tags in other states go for typically.
Yeah, because we don't have that kind of mule deer.
Yeah.
Because we get to hunt them all through the rut.
Well, the raffle version raised $56,620,
Hmm.
a 38% increase from the all-time high.
Yeah.
And what's interesting is the mean purchase price was $43. So kind of on average, two chances, two names in the hat per participant.
Yep.
Right. So, very equitable. It was spread really evenly amongst the people who chose to participate.
Yep. Tank of gas ranging to 2 tanks of gas.
And the guy who actually
on your
won,
vehicle.
the guy who actually won spent like under $100
$100
or something, or he spent $100 on tickets.
Yeah, he spent $100. The winner,
I think that
which
that
could
would
be the
fall-
start of the arms race.
I think that in that case, you made more off a mule deer on raffle in Montana. I don't think that you would. That's
Yeah.
not going to hold true in Bighorns.
Yeah, but like I would love to see that.
Like, see,
So if the marketing mechanism were to change from curating individual donors with super deep pockets, right? Like you don't hold a raffle or an auction like that and being like, oh my God, a totally random person off the street walked in here and bought that thing.
Yeah.
Can you believe that?
yeah,
It's not done, right? The person or the top 2 people who are going to end up with
they're
this
in
thing.
communication with the people that are going to buy it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep. So if you took that level of effort and did a nationwide, ideally,
What's 500,000 at $50 an entry?
yeah,
That's just a matter of removing some number of zeros.
and like, would you get that many people to do it? I bet you would.
Well, I
right? But
think what
and you advertise to these areas that are like, I am so detached from bighorn sheep, I don't
Yeah.
even participate, right? And I'm just saying, like anecdotally, in the state of Montana, as we increased the bar price-wise for these species that are very, very limited, right? The supply demand that we already talked about. I had people within my personal circle that there was never, ever a question, nor would there ever be a question of how serious a hunter they are. But they were just like, I'm priced out of the game.
Yeah.
And they just made that decision early on. I can't float $250 out there for a chance. I'm just going to concentrate on other things.
Yeah.
So, I mean, whether you think that's a significant number or not, that is happening. So I want to know if we said, here's the places that don't participate in the conservation of this species. And we put our efforts into saying like, okay, here's a way.
Yeah.
Would that then lead to greater participation in the conservation of that species in general?
Yes.
Right? Because, well, I threw $5 in and then I read some stuff on bighorn sheep and boy, I like that idea. Now I'm just a little more invested than I was.
You know that sheep day we went to at the Hunt Expo, where we put in our raffle tickets
Yep.
and sat there. I've never thought about and cared about sheep so much as I did for that hour.
I think it's safe to say this on the raffle front, even as you do with bighorn sheep. It's not a question of. It's definitely not a question of. Do we want $400,000 or zero?
Yeah.
It's probably some question of, do we want 400 or 250, or 400 or 2, or whatever the hell it is. It's not like you're giving to move to a raffle. You're not giving up the whole thing. You're giving up probably something, but you're not losing the whole thing.
Well,
And
you're
giving up
gaining a
some
ton of
knowns,
public
too.
participation.
I believe that
Yeah.
Idaho Wild Sheep Foundation, for that statewide tag, they switch every other year. I believe so. They one year they auction it, then the next year they raffle it.
Yep.
I
know
could be-
how you could put that? Wall Street, Main Street. Wall Street.
Ooh, there you go.
Wall Street,
Branding.
Main Street.
But there's just like, I feel like I mean, look at the state of skiing in the United States, right? These major Vail.
Well, there's only 2 ski companies left in the whole country
right.
anymore.
And they have made a very public decision to raise prices cater to fewer customers year over year at a higher price to that customer, and that's just the way skiing's going to be, right? I mean, I think that is a very good example of where hunting, at least right now for certain species, already is, and it went that way a long time ago, right? It's like I always like remind people when I'm in that sheep auction, I'm like, what's fun here is the percentage of people who have ever actually had a sheep tag that are in this room right now. This whole industry is here, but relative, like the amount of actual sheep hunters, very, very few.
Yep. But see that guy back there? He got 6.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And we're like, you know, and it's this thing that we're expected to celebrate. And like, are we just so far down the road that we can't go back and be like, man, we got to try something else? Because it turns out relatively very few people actually give a shit about sheep because they just will never get one. And we talk about, so I have a lifetime license in Idaho, which gives me the privilege of having my name in the sheep draw as a resident, which is, I believe, still, if you're applying as a resident in the state of Idaho for bighorn sheep, that is the best odds of drawing bighorn sheep in the U.S. still, I think, depending on your unit. Every year I talk about how stupid I am. I should be applying for badass mule deer tags in Idaho every year because mathematically I will not draw that tag.
Mm-hmm.
But I know people who have, right? And they're at this point, like, huge chip on my shoulder. I'd much rather draw a mule or a bighorn sheep tag than buy one. Because it's like, that's where the hunt is.
It's more fun.
Oh, it's more fun. Yeah, for sure. So I don't know. I think this is a legitimate issue with the hunting system in America. Like, we've already made the decision to just reserve elite opportunities for folks with elite bank accounts. And I don't believe that's right in any way, shape, or form. And we're not exploring ways to change that system. And I think it's going to be at the detriment of hunting. Because it's like, well, why would I give a shit about that? It's like, I lost that game a long time ago.
Ladies and gentlemen, Ryan Callaghan.
Amen, Cal.
Thank you for joining. We'll find you at the what the hell is it called?
MeatEater Podcast Network.
YouTube
On
channel.
YouTube. Good night. Uncompadre, or The Other Robert W. Service by Bob Service. This next story came to us through Keith Anspaugh, the manager of the First Light store in Haley, Idaho. Keith received a call from a customer one day who phoned in to tell him about an experience he'd had while wearing a piece of First Light gear, the Uncompadre Puffy. While I'd argue that the jacket is certainly not the star of the story, this gentleman had gotten into a very sticky situation in the mountains of northwest Montana. He felt that his survival was due in part to the quality of the jacket he was wearing. As you'll hear, there are a few other pieces of gear that would have served him well, and he readily admits that he should have been carrying them. To be honest, though, what caught my eye about this story wasn't the coat, which is a damn good puffy, but rather the narrator's name, Robert W. Service. As everyone knows, or at least they better know, Robert Service is the name of the greatest poet of all time. If you ask me, better than Shakespeare, Emily Dickinson, and Walt Whitman all put together. Known as the Bard of the Yukon, Service was born in 1874 and is the author of the greatest poem ever written, The Cremation of Sam McGee. It's the story of a pair of gold miners during the Yukon Gold Rush, one of whom, Sam McGee, is from Tennessee. He hates the cold of the North, hates it severely, and it's not until his death that he finally gets some much-needed relief. The poem begins, "There are strange things done in the midnight sun by the men who moil for gold. The Arctic trails have their secret tales that would make your blood run cold. The Northern Lights have seen queer sights, but the queerest they ever did see was that night on the marge of Lake LaBarge. I cremated Sam McGee." You'll have to read it to see how it ends. And then you might want to follow up by reading the second greatest poem of all time, also written by Service, called The Shooting of Dan McGrew. Now, what binds these two Robert W. Services, one a dead Scottish-Canadian poet and the other a living commercial fisherman from Oregon, isn't just their name or the fact that they are actually related. They are bound also by experiences with extreme cold. Only one of them, however, lived through two experiences so harrowing that they would earn him the nickname Black Cloud Bob.
My name's Bob Service. I'm from the Pacific Northwest. I live in a small coastal town in Oregon. The story I'm going to tell you took place on November 15th, 2023 in Sanders County, Montana. I've lived here in Astoria, Oregon my whole entire life. To make a living, I commercial fish and also a member of an operating engineer's trade. It's a pretty economically depressed place, so growing up in a small coastal community, even though my parents weren't really hardcore, we spent a lot of time outside and we ate a lot of the fish, crab, deer, elk. It just became a way of life. We lived off the land here and it just kind of morphed into my adulthood and it became what I'm all about. I started hunting when I was 12. I've had horrible luck at it, but it's part of who I am and I love it. People approach me and they're like, "Man, if you didn't have bad luck, you wouldn't have any luck." I've been labeled Black Cloud Bob, or I've also been told I'm lucky. I don't know what it is, to be honest with you, but I mean, I was on a crab boat one time that was sinking, and we got rescued off that. I've been hit by an Amtrak train. I've had some pretty impressive things happen to me, so I'm still here, and there must be some kind of a reason. For the story that I'm about to tell you, which took place in November of 2023, I need to go back to 2010. I had been in a relationship for 4 or 5 years. I met this gal, and she was like 20, and I was 33. And she came over to my house, and she never left. She had mentioned that, she had an interest in wanting to go deer hunting, and I'm like, well, let's fulfill your interest. Let's go. So I bought her a deer tag. I took her out to a gun range, and I let her handle a rifle. Everything in my mind that you would do to fulfill somebody that hadn't spent much time around guns. You showed them how it works, let them handle the firearm, you let them shoot. So I did all these things, and I take my ex-girlfriend hunting about 5 hours south of where I live, so it was a camping hunting destination trip. Took her out hunting, and I found a buck, and I said, "Hey, would you like to shoot this buck?" She said yes, and when I first spotted this thing, it was probably like almost 1,000 yards away, so we closed the distance to about 300 yards. I set her up, and I'm like, well, here's the deer. Find it in the scope, and when you're ready, shoot it. The funny thing about this story is I don't normally bring a dog with me hunting, but I had this little Springer Spaniel. She was about a 35-pound dog, and she went with me everywhere. She was in the back seat, and right when all this stuff happened, she started barking and freaking out. Looking back, I still think that dog was trying to tell me that she just had maybe like a premonition that something was going to go wrong that day. And I scolded her for it. And I feel horrible about that because I think that dog just maybe had a hunch. She shoots this deer. The deer falls down. I rig her up and I put the firearm on her back on a sling. I empty it. I put a pack frame on, bags on my back, and I'm going to bone this deer out. We're going to hike down to it, and I'm side hilling trying to find it. And We make our way over to the animal. The deer was about 25 feet to my immediate right. The animal is mortally wounded, but it's still alive. She was up on the hill on the steep bank, and I'm directly across from this animal. And I said, why don't you go ahead and chamber a roundup and dispatch this deer? So she started to cycle around with this rifle. It was my rifle, and it had a detachable magazine. The spring had a little bit of slack, so when you put a round into the magazine and you went to chamber it to get that bullet to feed into the chamber, sometimes you kind of had to put your hand on the bottom of the clip to raise that spring up. In that action, she was trying to fight it. It was foreign to her, and she didn't know her way around it. Unknowingly, that muzzle was coming towards my direction, to my right. And about the time I'm like, oh, that muzzle's way in the danger zone of my safe, the gun went off. Boom! And I felt the bullet go through my thigh. And immediately I remember saying to her, oh my God, you just shot me in the leg. And it wasn't like the movies where you fly or fall. I stood there and I'm like, oh my God. I'm like, oh, I got to get out of here. And I took a step and down I went. Just by the pain and the shock and everything that I was going into, I pretty much figured that was time. I was going to say goodbye right there. She called 911, and for about an hour and a half or 2 hours, she had first responders, firefighters, EMTs searching this mountain for us. I had told secondhand, the dispatcher, that we're on this road. We're at the 3.5 mile marker. It was a 1-ton Dodge diesel crew cab truck. And it's super crazy because the dispatcher at the time had enough common sense to reach out to a local there. And this man was like 80 years old at the time. She called him up and she said, hey, I think there's a hunter behind your house. He's been shot. He's wounded. And this old timer got in his pickup just based off the description and drove up there and found me. I'm sitting there, I'm laying on my back, and things are starting to get slowed down, and I'm actually playing like highlight reels of my life. I had all this real super vivid memories of things that happened 40 years ago that were as vivid as something that happened 10 minutes ago. That's when I knew I was probably getting ready to say goodbye. But shortly after that old man found me, he had a bunch of EMTs right directly behind him, and they packed me down to a landing, and I was life flighted to Eugene, Oregon. I woke up 2 weeks later, and my dad was there, and he's like, do you know what day it is? And I'm like, no. And he's like, you've been asleep for 10 days. I spent almost 50 consecutive days in the hospital and almost a year of recovery before I was able to walk. But that hunting accident, what I had to go through has been, over the last 14 years as a result of that event, quite an experience. What I battled and what I went through trying to rehabilitate myself and get myself back to work. Like I said, I work as a commercial fisherman, and being a guy in a trade, I worked on a lot of heavy-duty construction that required pile driving, dredging, dock, wharf construction, that kind of stuff, that having some debilitating injury creates a little bit of resentment. We stayed together for 5 or 6 years, but I just couldn't get over the fact that she shot me. Even though it was an accident, I tried to put myself in her shoes, think about what she was going through and the trauma that she went through shooting me. But I just couldn't get over it. I had times where I'd get these staph infections and it would make me just horribly sick. I got osteomyelitis, which is a bone infection. I had to have my metatarsal bone cut off, and the second toe, I think they call it the second distal, they had to clip that one off because I wore the end of it off. I learned a lot about infection and how sick it can make you. I was sitting there stressing, and I was watching the money leave my bank account. I'd go for a couple months where I'd be able to work, and then I was plagued with an infection. I wouldn't be able to work for months. Even though it was debilitating, once I was upright, there was no slowing me down. I pedaled in 10 miles to kill a bull elk on a logging road on a bicycle the next year. So I definitely got right back on the bike and ripped the training wheels off and I tried to be as headstrong as I could be. I actually think it made me work harder than most people because I had this weight of this debilitating leg or this slowed down leg. November of 2023, I had just spent several months fishing every day on a commercial fishing boat in and out of Astoria. So I was really looking forward to the fall, and the year prior, I didn't really get much hunting time in. So after going for a couple of years, I wanted to set myself up where I had some time. Our Oregon elk season, which takes place in Middle Oregon, is a big part of my life. Elk season is traditional to us as Christmas morning is for some people. There's a lot of families involved, and we rely heavily on eating elk meat. I wanted to go hunting in Montana before our elk season started, and I had this idea in my head that I wanted to go and try and hunt for mule deer. Oregon has horrible mule deer hunting, and I wanted to shoot a nice mature mule deer buck. And I cut some corners. And that's probably another reason why I got in the trouble I got into. It was a Sunday, and I had told my wife, I'm like, deer, I'm going to go hunting. Wanted to utilize some hunting tags in Montana. The person that I was supposed to go with didn't draw. She's a busy woman, hardworking gal. And she's like, well, I can't go. I can't leave. And I'm like, I'll just go over for a couple days and I'll come back. So that's what I did. I threw my stuff in my pickup. I was just going to kind of cruise around and go hunting. It wasn't my first time hunting in Montana. I've probably been there 5 or 6 times prior. I went to the area that I knew first, and I spent half a morning there kind of cruising around and decided that I wanted to actually go out and just hunt and explore. Spend a couple days messing around in country that I hadn't really been to before. I went south about 2.5 hours from where I'd normally go hunting, and I drove up this ridge, and I had got up to this point where I was overlooking this reservoir and mountains. It was beautiful, vast, big country, and I'm like, oh, I'll put a rifle on my shoulder and my little day pack on, and I'll just go for a little jaunt up this ridge. It's awful weather, raining, sideways, nasty. I'm going up this ridge, and I guess it was probably around 1 or 2 in the afternoon. Over there in that time of the year, I think it gets dark around 4:30 or 4:15. It was starting to be that time where the lights were starting to go out, and I'm like, well, I better turn around and make my way back down to the pickup and have some dinner and call my wife and figure out where I'm going to stay tonight. As I did that, I was coming back down the hill, and everything just went black. I don't know what happened. I know I fell. All I remember is my legs being above my head, and then everything went black. I wake up and it's dark, and I kind of panicked because it's pitch black and I don't know how long I've been out, and my leg is really, really messed up. I mean, messed up bad. Hurting bad. And I could tell my ankle was all cocked over. And I thought I would expedite things and I would go down this ridge and get down to the road that I had driven my truck up to where I was. Well, when I bailed off the ridge, I kept on taking it down thinking I was going to cut this road, and I never cut it. I was wearing a BOA-type ratcheting hunting boot. This particular hunting boot had a sole on it that was super hard and slick. I'd walk over to blow down limbs, and it was like walking on a sheet of ice. Everything was just slick and slimy and wet and saturated, and if it wasn't raining sideways, it was snowing. I would just be walking along, and all of a sudden I'd be just right on my back, smack. And I don't know how many times I fell because of that. With my experience in 2010, you'd think I'd be pretty set up as far as having some kind of GPS or some kind of transponder type apparatus. My phone battery was dead. I couldn't access any maps, Onyx maps or anything. And I just completely put myself into a situation where I got bit. I had taken compass readings and I knew before I had left where I needed to go to get back to my pickup. However, I just couldn't achieve that. It was very humbling to be a mile or two away from your vehicle and have a broken leg that you can barely stand on and some injuries that you knew that you might not walk away from. I kept taking this ridge down, and I got down in this creek bottom, and I'm like, well, I can take a creek to somewhere. The very first night, I went through this country where it was hands and knees crawling through and over, and I remember getting to this point. The whole night I'd been up trying to get out, and I was so freaking exhausted. I remember reaching in my pocket. I pulled out my keys and I hit my key fob to see if I was close to my truck. I remember hearing my horn, and I'm like, I'm okay, I can just fall asleep. I was so exhausted, I just fell asleep on this hillside. And I wake up to this mule deer doe blowing and hissing at me and stomping at me. And it's sunny. I'm looking at her, and this deer is just completely agitated that I'm around. She's hissing, and then finally I kind of shoot her away, and I had this little rim rock thing that I was laying next to on this hillside, and the sun was beating on me, and I was warming up, drying out, and kind of trying to wake up, and I could hear that doe, that mule deer doe up there still blowing, and I could hear her hooves hitting the ground. And the next thing I know, she kicked up this boulder directly above me, and this rock that was the size of a basketball or a cantaloupe comes hurling down over this hillside, and I felt the wind of that rock go by my head. And I'm thinking to myself, I'm like, geez, the deer are even trying to get me. Well, her tracks, I kind of noticed that was kind of the direction I needed to go. Well, I ended up running into this deer a couple more times. It was really strange because when I caught up to her, she had a nice mature mule deer with her, like a 4-point that was just a beautiful buck. At that point, hunting was the last thing on my agenda. There could have been a world record deer there and I wouldn't have shot it. I needed to get out of there. I didn't even know if my gun was operable because it had fallen 20 feet and taken a pretty hard hit. The whole muzzle was fouled, so I couldn't even shoot the gun safely. And I end up running into these deer, and now there's 4. There's a mule deer doe, a mule deer buck, and a whitetail buck and a whitetail doe, and they're all hanging out together. And I'm like, man, that is really weird. That is really bizarre. Well, they ended up taking off, and I ended up making my way down to this road, and I'm like, oh, this must be the road where I drove up with my truck. And so I'm down there all night pacing around looking for my tracks on this road, and I literally am just going over the same country over and over again, and I look up this road and I see 3 kids, and I look over to my right and there's a gate, a farmer gate type thing, and behind that is this massive whitetail buck. I still can't believe how big it was, but I saw these, what I thought were 3 kids trying to yell at him and get their attention, and they're not yelling back at me. Well, the whole time what I'm thinking are kids is a hallucination. I'm hallucinating. I spent 4 whole nights out in the woods with no food, and the only water I was drinking from, springs in the ground. I was weak, I was tired, I was hurt. Haven't eaten, haven't drank, and I was so freaking exhausted, I'd be walking along and I would just pass out and fall down on the ground. I was in trouble. All I could think about in my head was, God, I missed the check-in last night. What is my wife thinking? What is my poor wife going through right now? And I'm just trying to beat my way back. Every step I took was like taking 5 back. Nothing was working out. I was just terrified and worried about my daughter. I knew my wife would be okay, but I just couldn't stomach my daughter not having a dad. So it was a hell of a time. I mean, just the fear and being hurt and the helplessness. I don't have any idea how much country I traversed. When your legs broke, trying to use your gun as a crutch and just trying to transit through that country with all the elevation and it being covered in snow and slick and over blowdown trees, you can only get around so much. But I just never would stop. I just kept on trying to beat my way ahead and through and trying to get out of this situation. This ridge that I was on, it was open on the east-facing slope, and then on the west-facing slope, it was timbered terrain and country. I got into these bluffs, and I could see a trail below me, and it was so steep and it was so sketchy. It was like being placed on a rock wall where you're looking down, where you have 12 or 14 feet where you're going to hit bottom. The very last night, it would have been like the fourth night I was out there, I'm laying under this fir tree on the side of this mountain, and I found myself over into these bluffs, and I'm kind of covered up, and I'm soaking wet, I'm cold, and I've got one of the First Light puffy coats on, the down coats, and I couldn't believe how tough that was because I thought I would absolutely shred it. I tore it in one spot, but the amount of brutality that I put on that coat was incredible. There was one night where it rained almost 2 inches. I encountered snow, rain, sleet, just about everything you can encounter. But it kept me warm and kept me dry, but I was wearing like denim jeans and my bottom half was soaked, and God, it was just a miserable time to never really warm up or dry out. But I had a space blanket, and if I would say to have anything in a hunting pack, have a space blanket, because if you can insulate yourself, even after getting wet, you'll be all right. People ask me, did you build a fire? And I'm like, how do you build a fire in country and ground that's completely saturated? You're so critical that you're now thinking about yourself like your cell phone. It's like, I only have 36% life left. I need to protect that 36%. That's kind of how I viewed my leg and my body in that situation. So I was warm enough with the space blanket, and I didn't see where I was going to benefit from having a fire that I couldn't even hardly start to begin with. Everything was just wet, saturated. It was more important to keep the energy. And that last night, I'm curled up in a ball under that tree, and I hear a siren. Middle of the night, I have no idea what time it is. I hear this just siren, and I'm looking down this ridge, and I see what I think is somebody shining the spotlight, but they're probably over a mile away. And I'm like, well, that's where my pickup is, but I can't get there. I was blowing on a whistle, trying to get their attention. I had a headlamp on. This guy that found me later on told me he saw my SOS strobe. So they had me located, and they knew where I was at because they were at my pickup. And because I was in such a rough spot, they were going to go up there and extract me with a helicopter. The weather had changed, and it was just pea soup fog, and they couldn't fly. They figured that I obviously was injured, and that's why I was hung up where I was hung up. But they didn't know how they were going to get me out of there. And I don't think they were expecting what I did. I'm up on this cliff, and I'm looking at this shale, and it's probably a quarter mile down to this trailhead. And I'm thinking, I can't climb 30 feet up a vertical rock face to get over these bluffs. So I guess at this point, my only option is to slide down this mountain. I just got on my butt, and I slid down the hill. There wasn't really much left of my jeans, but at that point, I didn't care. I just took it slow and rode her all the way to the bottom of the trail. And I got down to this trailhead and pretty much drug myself out. I didn't know where the trail was going to pop out at, but I ended up encountering this kiosk where this fire had occurred, and 4 or 5 wildland firefighters had lost their life at this particular spot. And I'm like, well, I must be getting close to some kind of parking lot or something. I went maybe 100 or 200 yards further, and I heard people talking, and that's when Mason, who was head of the search and rescue where I was at, he's like, "We've been looking for you for a couple days." They actually had an ambulance there, and I got up and crawled in the back of the ambulance, and they started evaluating me, and they're like, "You're going to the hospital. Your vitals are pretty dangerous." My kidney functions, things were getting ready to shut down. So I was one more day, and I probably wouldn't be here anymore telling you this story. But it was kind of comical. He just couldn't get over the fact that I just went there by myself. He was certain that somebody had dropped me some info or coordinates or a pin or something. And I'm like, nope, I just came here on my own. One of the things that is just everlasting in my head is when my wife got to the hospital, obviously it was a little bit of an emotional thing. So her and my father-in-law are there. Living in a small town when you know everybody. When we got married, it was a big event. We had a lot of people there and stuff. And she said something to me that will always stick. She goes, "I didn't know if it would be morbid to have your funeral the same place we got married." I didn't know what to say. Pretty emotional. My whole ankle was cocked 90 degrees off my right leg. It was completely dislocated from where it was supposed to be. I also had frostbite, hypothermia, and all the emotion, being in a hospital, the hospital visits, even getting home and transitioning to home. My leg was already damaged before from the bullet going through my thigh. But when I got out of the woods in Montana, I had just worn my right leg down to there was just nothing left. I mean, I was down to bones, just trying to beat my way out of there. And I just did irreplaceable damage to it and finished it off. I had this horrible infection in my leg, and I went to multiple doctor visits, vascular physicians and whatnot, and they did all this stuff, and they're like, "We can preserve your leg, but it'll be a fused joint. You'll have a very noticeable limp the rest of your life." That just didn't really fit into my schedule when they told me that I was going to be close to 14 months with non-weight bearing and pins. I just elected to have my leg amputated. So I had a below the knee amputation done on February 14th. And I'm going to be receiving a prosthetic on the 17th of April. Losing this leg is actually a good thing. It's a positive thing because my leg was so damaged from my hunting accident. My leg would swell up, and sometimes it would be near impossible to get a shoe on or a boot on or anything because my ankle was so swollen. I don't have to deal with that anymore. So I'm actually just grateful to not live in chronic pain anymore. I can go down to the beach and dig a limit of razor clams or drive out to the creek and drift a little salmon egg through a hole and catch steelhead. I mean, I did that the other day on crutches. It's part of who I am. But it's still a big, wild place, and we just don't want to lose touch of how quick things can go bad. And that's why I wanted to tell this story. What happened to me shouldn't have happened. I should have had everything on me that I needed. That's what I can't stress enough is if you leave the road, you better be prepared to leave the road. What happened to me is just due to my personality and my ignorance and trying to be in a hurry and cutting corners and just trying to fit too much into one small bag. Got me hurt and could have got me killed and has now put a real big skew in my life at this age. Last night it was my daughter's birthday and we're singing her happy birthday and I'm looking in that little girl's eyes and I just glad to be here, you know? You just don't know when you're gonna meet your maker. So maybe just kind of give everything a second thought and go, is that a good idea? You can go out there and have a good time, but make sure you Have your T's crossed and your I's dotted.